Well, thanks a lot for that warm introduction. I've been looking forward to this. I actually wrote a series of articles 20 years ago in the Library Journal that in 20 years we would have ebooks and virtual libraries, and people thought that was pretty wild stuff at the time. And in order to make that true, I thought I better get in gear and contribute to that technology myself. There's, of course, a whole explosion of interest in ebooks. And I've written about the life cycle of technology, and technologies really don't take off until all the enabling factors are in place. So now we have these tablets with high-resolution screens. We have ubiquitous high-bandwidth wireless connection. We have digitized books. So the enabling factors are really in place. So I'll give you a quick demo, and then we can chat about the future of publishing and how it's going to migrate to virtual books. So this is called Blio. It's an e-reader. It's a software product. It's free. This is a joint venture between my company, KNFB Reading, and Baker & Taylor, which, as you probably know, is the leading book distributor in the world, and they have relationships with 44,000 publishers. So we have a lot of books. We have 1 million free books, and then we have some for-pay books. That's our business model. And there's a lot of unique features in this. So you can go and browse our bookstore or the free books. And if, for example, if there's an audio book, we actually marry the audio book with the visual book and combine the two. We have a lot of features that help people to read. That's how I started in this field, with reading machines for the blind, and then we had reading machines for dyslexics. So I was building e-readers for dyslexic students 20 years ago. It turns out almost half the population has some issue with reading. Kids don't read very well. Even a third or fourth grader may be reading, but not at their intellectual level. This frees them to actually read at their intellectual level because it will read to them with synchronized highlighting. If you're elderly, you may have low vision. People are learning English or some other language as a second language. There's, of course, dyslexia and dysgraphia and people with poor reading skills and slow learners. And there's about 12 different categories that can benefit from these kinds of features. So one thing you may notice is that the book is in the original format. Other e-readers, like the Kindle, just give you the text. There may be a few line drawings interspersed, but a lot of effort has been made by the publisher to present the original graphics. So for things like children's books, cookbooks, travel books, textbooks, this is particularly important. So I'll have it read this.
The 3 little pigs were all pink and plump, and they all had curly-whirly tails. When it was time for them to make their way in the world,
this is actually
their
the
mother
audio
gave them a
book
piece of advice.
married with the print book.
Look after yourselves.
With synchronized highlighting. We actually use speech recognition,
speech recognition
that I originally developed in another company, which is now with Nuance, which used to be Kurzweil Computer Products. Actually figures out what word the human reader is saying, so it can synchronize it.
Aha, thought the first little pig. This straw is just...
Now, if it turns out you don't have an audio book, we can use text-to-speech, and that actually sounds almost as good.
Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank, underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Now, my dears, said old Miss...
Text-to-speech has come a long way. My first company, Kurzweil Computer Products, which is now Nuance, developed the first text-to-speech in 1975. So I've been involved with these technologies for quite a long time. If you have a textbook, a lot of textbook publishers have auxiliary interactive material, but it's often a website, so they tell the student, go to this website and try to find this particular illustration that's maybe animated, but it makes sense to actually put that right in the book. So here's an illustration, but we can make it come alive.
Ionic bonding occurs between 2 atoms when one of the atoms has sufficient strength of attraction to remove an electron from the other atom.
You can have interactive quizzes, and if it's a physics textbook, there could be an illustration of how gravity works. So let's see, I practiced on this test. I got that one right. Well, I was good at this morning. I really do know this material. There you go. And there's a lot of other features. I can get a Wikipedia article. Get dictionary definitions. I can highlight material. I can take notes. So let's see. So that's always dangerous to do in front of a live audience. And there's many different views. We can see thumbnails. Now this is the view that you get. Well, wait a second. Let me get it right. This is the view that you get in Amazon. So for a novel, it may not make a lot of difference, but for lots of books, it makes a huge difference. We can change the print.
This is a story about...
Zoom in and out. So there's a lot of different features, but key is that you have the original format, which particularly for textbooks, children's books, any kind of illustrated book makes a big difference. A lot of publishers have annotated, interactive, web-based material that they can build in and take from a website and now actually put into the book. We have these features that actually help you learn to read and are compensatory, that reads for you, so children can actually read on their own initiative at their intellectual level. And we have a lot of research actually shows that that actually helps build their reading skills. So this will be quite revolutionary for children learning to read. They can learn to read, and they can read to learn, so they'll be more motivated about reading. And as I say, you add up all the different groups that have an issue with reading, these features of reading to you, which we've pioneered for over 20 years, will help build their reading skills. So that's just a little bit of illustration. Thank you.
I believe they're going to take away this podium so you can see us as we have this conversation.
Disappear.
That's right. And let's see how magical it is.
Well, we can start chatting.
That's right. So let's start a little bit talking about about the Blio and what you're introducing here. One of the questions I had was what features are part of the platform and which ones are added by the publishers? And just in general, what's the authoring environment? So for example, when somebody is saying, I want to put up my interactive textbook, how much work do they have to do to get from what they have now to.
We have a tool that makes it very easy. It's an authoring tool. So if they have the videos and interactive material, it's very easy to stick them in. Those are basically web browsers. So all I have to do actually is put in the URL, and it's right there as an illustration. So it's really very simple.
The underlying format is web-based?
Yeah, and so they can actually update it and change it later on. We've talked to a lot of magazine publishers, and there'll be a lot of magazines on this as well. So ads can be done this way. The ad can change after the publication is sold.
Yeah.
But textbooks can also be updated. I mean, the whole thing is online.
So another just practical point. You showed on the synchronization of the book and the audio two cases. One, it's being read, and they're clearly, if it's being text-to-speech, then well, actually, let me go back because there's even some issues there. Do you have performance rights issues? Do you see? Have you had any? Because some people are so crazy about DRM that they say, "Oh no, you can't have even a computer."
Well, there has been this issue which Amazon has run into. We expect the vast majority of books there will not be an issue with using TTS, and actually, the books that the publishers sometimes have an issue with TTS is they feel it'll compete with their audiobook, so they generally have an audiobook for the books that they don't want TTS used. So in those cases, we'll use the audiobook.
Well, but there's the expectation that somebody will pay twice, or will you have a bundled price?
I mean, that'll be a separate SKU of a book that's bundled with the audiobook and the visual book, and they're synchronized.
But I mean, don't you think that a reader would typically say, hey, if I want that feature, I want to get both of them for the same price?
Pricing is going to be up to the publishers. I think you will see them offering premium editions, like the audiobook married to the visual book, and also having other features like interviews with the author and putting in interactive features. So on the page where you have a photo of the author, you can click on that and see the author talking to you about the book. And it's going to be just like DVDs. For a while, there have been premium versions, or generally a standard DVD will have some premium features, and then you have a super premium version that they may charge a little more for. I mean, it's going to be something that's worked out in the marketplace.
Well, bringing up the example of DVDs raises a point of format wars, because in the end, there was one format that worked in any device. And now we have a lot of players competing to say, no, you're going to use my reader, my format. Now, some people are going far enough to say, well, we'll at least support my reader on multiple devices. I know you're doing that. But at the end of the day, don't readers want just to be able to say, hey, look, I have a device. I want this thing to work. I don't have to install additional software.
We will run on every reasonable platform. I mean, it runs on the iPhone, and we are adding lots of other platforms, if they're at all open, which almost every platform except maybe the Kindle is. And you can have our DRM contract will allow you to have multiple devices as part of buying a book, and all of it's in the cloud. So if you stop on a certain page and then you're on the road and you pick up your iPhone, you can start reading right from where you were.
So our experience at O'Reilly in selling books has been somewhat surprising in that the iPhone has become a very, very powerful platform, despite the fact that a lot of people said it was too small for reading. But what's been particularly surprising to us is that the best channel on the iPhone is not within an ebook reader. Say people have said, okay, I've got Stanza or whatever. It's literally been by selling each book as a standalone application. And that seems to me to suggest that part of what readers want is the convenience of simply treating, just like you pick up a book. You don't actually pick up a reader and then put a book into it. And do you foresee a future in which the Blio tech might become incorporated directly into books rather than books incorporated into the Blio?
We're actually talking to some publishers about that and having special versions that are white labeling is going to be a big part of our business, and we're talking to major retail chains, which you've heard of, and computer manufacturers and publishers about doing that kind of thing. And we will also be looking at reading other formats. So if people have bought a book for some other reader, we would hope to use that as well. So there's many different directions we can push this, but right now we are introducing this so it will work on many different platforms, and the DRM will support that.
So what's your general position on DRM? Strong DRM, weak DRM, up to the publisher?
Well, it's definitely up to the publisher. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed that the music industry finally dropped DRM.
Right.
And,
some of us were telling them that a long time ago.
So we'll see what happens to the publishing world. I mean, we're not going to take the lead on that. They want DRM now.
Yeah.
I will say I'm happy to see the publishing industry taking ebooks and taking the lead on this, unlike the music industry that tried to keep the same business model that was the business model when my father was a 10-year-old. And, you know, spending $20 for an album where you may only want one song. And they really resisted that new business model. And so it was a very unsmooth transition.
But don't we see some of that in today's thinking about ebooks as well? For example, you know, when I think about each new medium that has come along, it's led to structural changes in the market. You know, so for example, when we started the web, it was sort of easy for everybody to see, oh yeah, this is kind of like an online magazine. And so everybody thought, oh, you know, content is king was one of the early phrases. And of course, Time Life was going to be one of the big publishers. You know, people would say, we have the content. And nobody foresaw the rise of Google and automated curation and the fact that it was going to be the page, not the publication that mattered. You know, with YouTube, I don't think people understood that it was going to drive a huge amount of content to the 5-minute form factor. You know, Facebook, I don't think anybody foresaw that it would be social gaming that would be the business model. So can we expect similar changes in ebooks? You know, is it really just going to be putting books as they've been in the past?
Well, I think you're right. You know, we can point out all the advantages. You don't have to keep inventory, and inventory is very heavy. I mean, I like.
But these are advantages for the publishers. They're not advantages for the user.
Right. So they're advantages. So people go to this new format, but then it introduces radically different business models where people have to rethink how they do business, and that will happen in books. I mean, we're starting out by providing books, but you know, once you do that, you do have greater flexibility of having lots of different ways. You can rent books, you can rent access to entire publisher, you can pay by the page, you can pay by the minute. I mean, these business models are easy to implement, and people will introduce them, and if the public likes them, they'll present a competitive advantage. And so you will see this evolve. But it starts out by taking something we understand, a book, and then introducing the idea, okay, an ebook. But these other ways of selling that content will happen as well. A lot of authors are offering, we have 1 million free books, and a lot of them are contemporary books where authors put some book for free, hoping to build their own stature and reputation. So providing free material is actually goes back to
that does
the first web browsers.
Sort of bring up another question. When you have that much free material, doesn't that put a premium on ways of finding that material?
Well, I didn't get a chance to demonstrate that, but we have powerful ways to search that material. And, and there's actually a lot of high-quality free material, so we're competing with ourselves because our business model is the for-pay book, but we want to provide, we have multiple sources for those free materials.
It seems to me that there's a huge challenge in understanding what marketing is going to look like in the future ebook world. You know, certainly on the web, I don't think anybody understood how search engine optimization was going to change the game. And I think we're going to have to come up with new ways of telling the story about what's available.
Yeah, I mean, you can search now and find that the material you want is on page 237 of a particular book, and people may then want to just access that page or that chapter. And I don't think we can predict that, but we're providing a platform that does have the flexibility to adapt.
So let's move on to your ideas about the singularity, and in particular this idea that the pace of technology is actually increasing exponentially. So one of the things that raises is how long have we got for even a technology like this to matter? You know, if
Well, paradigm shifts happen faster and faster. I mean, think back just a few years ago, 2004, a couple of kids at Harvard were putting together a dating site so people could see each other's pictures, and now Facebook has 400 million users and is worth, you know, well into tens of billions of dollars. It is remarkable how predictable this exponential rise of information technology is. In Singularity's Near, I've got this graph, and we just extended it to 2008. It goes back to the 1890 census, the first census to be automated. Very smooth exponential growth of the price performance of computing. And it's not just Moore's law, because this started decades before Gordon Moore was even born. When one paradigm runs out of steam, they were shrinking vacuum tubes, and finally that hit a wall. It creates pressure for the next paradigm, and transistors came along, and then integrated circuits and Moore's law. So it's a very smooth progression through two world wars, the Great Depression, the Cold War, and so on. None of this has any effect. It's very predictable. And predictions I've made 25 years ago about the recent past have been tracked very accurately, particularly if you talk about these fundamental measures of information technology. And it affects not just computing, but brain scanning and genetic sequencing. It's doubled every year, and costs has come down by half every year, and so on. Exponential growth is very powerful and is very different than our intuition. Our intuition about the future is that it's linear. So I have these debates all the time. If you take 30 steps linearly, you get to 30. If you take 30 steps exponentially, 2, 4, 8, 16, you get to 1 billion. And that's not just an idle prediction about the future. I mean, when I was a student at MIT, we all shared a computer. It took up half a building, cost tens of millions of dollars. This is 1 million times cheaper and 1,000 times more powerful. That's a billion-fold increase in the amount of computation you get per dollar since I was a student, and we'll do it again in 25 years.
So, but you know, if you
So
follow
on
your,
this, just to finish the thought, we'll have computers that can simulate the entire human brain. It's a complicated discussion how we get to that, but by 2020, that amount of computation will cost $1,000. Another exponential progression is understanding the human brain. We can already simulate substantial slices of the cerebral cortex where we do our hierarchical thinking. And by the late 2020s, we will have models and simulations of the entire human brain. We'll understand its principles of operation, and we can create computers that really match human intelligence in every area. But it's not going to be an intelligent invasion from Mars to displace us. So we're going to use these devices, we're going to put them inside our bodies and brains, which has already started, to make ourselves smarter. I mean, that is what's unique about the human species. We've extended our reach ever since we picked up a stick to reach a higher branch. I mean, this thing on my belt makes me smarter, and it's not yet in my body and brain, but that's ultimately where it's going.
Yeah. In that regard, one of the comments I remember hearing from somebody at Google when they started the Google Book Scanning Project was that a lot of what was interesting was that they were exploring what computers could do with all that text, not just what humans could do with it. Because, of course, it's actually having our machines being able to read that much text that creates new capabilities, because we can't read them all.
Yeah, I mean, already the level of intelligence which computers have, which is not at human levels, but it's useful, can in fact search through every book. So if you want to find something, you can search every book in the world and every website. It's quite remarkable already. And imagine when they have some real understanding of what they're reading. They could read every single book. But we're going to literally put them in our bodies and brains to keep ourselves healthier and make ourselves smarter, put our brains out on the internet, harness the cloud of computing, which 20 years from now will be 1 million times more powerful than it is today.
So, again, though, when you lay out that future and you start to imagine that we have direct access to that much information, we already have a taste of it on the web. Does that change the status of the book as a repository of human knowledge?
Well, I don't think anybody can just stand on their laurels. We didn't finish Blio and say, okay, we're good for 20 years. Think back just a few years ago. There are no social networks, no wikis, no blogs. 10 years ago, people didn't use search engines. That sounds like ancient history. That was not so long ago. So nobody can stand on their laurels. Human knowledge is doubling every 13 months, and
Actually, the first search engine was in 1994, so it's actually getting up towards 20 years, believe it or not.
yeah, but most people didn't use them
Yeah.
even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to make ourselves smarter to keep up with that explosion of knowledge. I would say the book, which is a technology, goes back, a millennium. The Gutenberg press is half a millennium old. Has a very rich tradition, and it's not a matter of paper. It's a matter of a way of thinking and the idea of presenting an in-depth thought with a book-length work. So that art form is going to continue. It has tremendous roots. And it'll actually take a while to migrate away from paper. The projections are by 2018, ebooks will dominate. Already Amazon sells more ebooks than print books, but it's an online service.
I'm not sure that they do that on a regular basis. I think that announcement was about, over Christmas.
Yeah. Well, it's going to take a while to make the transition.
But even so, though, it does seem to me that there will be changes in particularly some types of books more than others. An example I use all the time is, say, the Atlas. It used to be a book, and now it's a service. It used to be something you went to on your web browser, and now it's something you do on your phone. Encyclopedias obviously have changed. So why is the novel or the long form, textual, say a history book or a biography sacrosanct?
It's an art form that goes back many hundreds of years.
But so is the symphony. I mean, people don't compose symphonies anymore. If they do, people don't. Not very many people listen to them.
I know some people that compose symphonies, but and there are rock symphonies. I mean,
I guess I'm so challenging. Are we really taking the implications of your exponential growth seriously enough in our thinking about the ebook future?
I don't think we can imagine where we'll go, and we're going to combine, literary works like the book with many other forms of experience. Virtual reality, for example, which right now is mostly in the game world, but you can add that to novels. So you read a novel, but then you can actually enter that world in a virtual reality environment. We do that, in fact, by translating books into movies.
Right.
So we'll be using these new technologies, and it's only limited by our imagination.
Right. So it really kind of gets back into this idea of we have to ask. This is something I've said in past talks to this very audience. We have to think as publishers, what job do we do for our readers? And if, for example, we're storytellers, then we need to say, how can this technology help us be better storytellers? If we're historians, we need to say, how can it help us be better historians? If we're map makers, how does it help us be better map makers?
Publishers are also marketing agents.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And any kind of knowledge creator, a book writer or a songwriter, has direct access to the market, and there are new channels that allow them to do that. But publishers can develop their reputation, help authors shape their works and get their name out into the world, and I think that's a major function of a publisher.
Yeah. So when you personally talk to us about your personal reading habits. How do you read? What do you read? You've written books.
Well, one of my favorite novelists is Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Yeah.
And it's actually a great example of the hierarchical thinking of human beings, because a sentence is a hierarchy of ideas and clauses, and he writes these page-long sentences, which are actually correct sentences, and they're fabulous in their poetic implications and the richness of language, and it's a real great example of human hierarchical thinking, and quite beautiful to boot. I read some classical works in my field, like Norbert Wiener's Cybernetics I read recently. Again, it was written in 1948, kind of introduced the whole computer world and its implications.
His other book, The Human Use of Human Beings, is very relevant too. His later book, The Human Use of Human Beings, is also very relevant.
Yeah, and he goes from sociological implications to the mathematics of artificial intelligence in the same paragraph, and it's quite interesting, particularly if you can follow all the things he's saying.
Yeah. So I still want to kind of think a little bit harder about the future. We have an audience here of people who are, in the near term, embracing this idea that they maybe have to deliver their work on the Kindle, on the iPhone, via Blio. But 5 years from now, what's that going to look like? Again,
I think
taking your increasing returns.
This little thing of having a web portal in a book opens up a whole world. The web ultimately is going to take over everything, including our minds. And one major developing implication is virtual reality, which we have now for kids in games, and we have virtual environments like Second Life, and we have 3D movies. But ultimately, we're going to have the ability to enter these virtual reality environments. You and I can do what we're doing now. In fact, we could do that now with certain technologies, even if we're hundreds of miles apart in a virtual environment. We're going to be able to ultimately do virtual reality from within our nervous systems. The nanobots in our brain would shut down the signals coming from your real senses, replace them with the signals that your brain would be receiving if you were in the virtual environment, and then it feels like you're in the virtual environment. And you'll have a virtual body, which doesn't have to be the same as your real body. So,
in the near time, we're already seeing some real breakthroughs in augmented reality, which I think is in many ways much more interesting than virtual reality.
Just late in 2009, you take your iPhone, point at a building, and you see the building on the video, but it actually figures out what the building is, and you can look inside the building and see that there's a Starbucks there. And so augmented reality is happening already. We'll put these in our eyeglasses, so as I look at someone, I'll see little pop-ups reminding me what their name is. That would be
absolutely. I've actually saw the demo. It's not in the released version, but I saw the pre-release version of Google Goggles, and that was in fact what they did. They held up the camera, and it said, "That's Tim O'Reilly." Now, I'm a fairly public person. There's lots of pictures of me on the web, but it was still pretty exciting to see, this is really here. Face recognition, an anonymous phone just can know who I am. Raises huge privacy implications, but that's what's exciting about the future. It's not like the past.
Yeah, and it's only 5-6 years from now when we'll routinely, instead of compromising and having a display on a device this size, when you really want a large display, we'll put them in our eyeglasses so you can have a virtual display. It'll stay constant as you move your head, or it can overtake your whole field of view and provide augmented reality. We'll routinely be online all the time in real reality and augmented and or virtual reality.
Right. That's kind of where I was trying to get you to go, because I do think that this idea of overlaying content on the real world, and it could be for informational publishing. I'm going travel and I go, what's that monument over there? I should be able to figure that out. In fact, there are applications that do that already, but there's also augmented reality fiction, which could go from an existing novel, take me there, so you could be expanding the story with, real background. You think of books like Dan Brown's books, which, everybody rushed from, I forget what was his book, the Da Vinci Code. They all went and looked at The Last Supper because they were, oh my God, I've got to go look at that picture. They went to the web, but it could be right in the book. So you start to imagine how you could have this interpenetration of additional information, even in fiction.
Those are easy examples. And we'll see new art forms that combine existing art forms, which we've seen already. I do think the novel and the nonfiction book with the serious statement about the world is an art form that will persist. Yeah. There are obvious ways to augment it. We will see new art forms emerge that we can't imagine today.
Yeah. We should take questions from the audience. So if there's anybody out there who has a question for Ray, please feel free to line up at the mics. Looks like we got somebody coming right up.
Howdy.
Introduce yourself, by the way.
My name is Matt with Inkling, but I'm not going to ask a question to do with any of that stuff. I'm a fan of Jeff Hawkins and some of his work, and he talks a lot about the challenges we have with respect to artificial intelligence and all of its promises in the context of the fact that we really don't understand natural intelligence yet. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how we can do something constructive with artificial intelligence if we don't even understand regular intelligence.
Well, my primary argument actually for artificial intelligence is this exponential process of learning about the brain, reverse engineering the human brain, which is exponential. We're doubling the spatial resolution of brain scanning every year. We're doubling the amount of data we're getting on the brain every year. We're doubling the scale and precision of simulations of the brain, which includes Hawkins' own simulation of the neocortex. And he has actually a model, which I think is pretty interesting, about one little module. I was thinking of calling that module Blio, that's repeated 1 billion times in the neocortex. And it's basically a pattern recognizer. And it recognizes patterns like the crossbar and a capital A, or at a higher level of the hierarchy, certain ideas that go together to create irony or humor. And it's the same pattern recognizer repeated over and over again in these hierarchies. And only mammals have a neocortex. And he's got a very good description of it in his book on intelligence. Yeah. But we're making exponential gains of actually scanning the human brain, understanding it, simulating individual neurons. There's 50,000 neuroscientists and engineers working on different aspects of this. I make the case in The Singularities Near that we will have these models at a great deal of precision within 20 years. And the goal is not to sort of mindlessly simulate a human brain without understanding it. The point is actually to understand, as Hawkins counsels, the principles of operation of how we create intelligence in the human brain. Then we can amplify it and focus on it, the same way that the whole world of aviation magnified Bernoulli's principle. Once we understood that there was less air pressure over a moving curved surface and a flat surface, we used engineering to create the whole world of aviation. As we understand these basic principles, like the basic pattern recognizer in the neocortex, we can create a neocortex that's not limited by a 1 cubic foot space in our brains.
Yeah, I would also add, and I think your example of aviation is a good one. We never were able to figure out in some ways how, say, even a bumblebee would fly. I think they figured it out fairly recently. We figured out a different way to do it. And artificial intelligence may not come because we have exactly duplicated the way the human brain works or we even understand it. But we're already seeing a lot of progress on things that in the past you would have said, oh, yeah, that requires intelligence.
Well, there's hundreds of examples of AI already. And people say, well, whatever happened to AI? I mean, pick up any product that was designed with intelligent computer-assisted design. Functions like search are using artificial intelligence. Get
stock trading. I mean, no humans are doing stock trading anymore.
With intelligent diagnosis. I mean, we could list 100 different applications, which used to be done by intelligent human intelligence. And my example of simulating and reverse engineering the human brain is really an existence proof that we will get there. But most of the history of artificial intelligence, as you say, was not based on how the human brain worked, because up until recently we didn't have access to see inside the human brain with enough precision. MRI can tell you, that something's going on here when I looked at a loved one, something's going on here when I solve a logic puzzle, but wasn't high enough resolution to actually figure out how it worked. Now we actually can get that data.
Well, there's also this really interesting concept that a lot of this is really augmentation. It's not necessarily that we're going to build machines that do everything a human can do and then more. It may well be that we develop intelligent machines that really are extensions of our own mentality. And we see this already at a primitive level in the web. And when I've talked about Web 2.0, a lot of the framing I've used for that is this idea of harnessing collective intelligence. A product like Google is actually getting millions of people to express their artifacts, their thoughts about what pages matter. And then Google harvests that and turns it into a more intelligent result. So we are part of Google. And we are part of Amazon. We are part of so many of these applications because our interactions with the system are its intelligence.
And that database that we're creating is itself intelligent and can then be mined to create intelligent behavior. Like Google translators are using basic pattern recognition methods applied to these massive Rosetta Stone databases that they have.
That's right.
And they actually automatically create a translator. Their Arabic to English translator actually matched human translators. Maybe the human translators aren't very good, but...
Right, back here.
Yes, in regards to the singularity, something that's bothered me for a bit, and I met someone from Colombia here, and we were standing outside the door, and I was kind of going over the theory, and he asked me, how will this affect the people of my country? And the answer I gave him was, you'll be left out. So how do you answer a question like that? Will it create another class structure?
Well, actually, these technologies, by the time they work well, are extremely inexpensive. I mean, consider this. 15 years ago, someone took out a mobile phone. It wasn't this small in a movie. That was a signal that this person was very wealthy, and they didn't work very well. It then took us 10 years to put out the first billion cell phones, 3 years to put out the second, 14 months to put out the third billion, 8 months to put out the fourth billion, 6 months to put out the fifth billion. And they're not just cell phones. According to the Apple ads, they do 140,000 different things. And they're very ubiquitous around the world. By the time, and that's because information technology has a 50% deflation rate. And so ultimately, these technologies become extremely inexpensive and by the time they work well. So the technologies that will enhance our health, extend our longevity, make us smarter, and this already makes us smarter, by the time they work well, are not just going to be in the hands of the wealthy. I mean, people say, oh, well, only the wealthy will have this. I say, yeah, like cell phones. I mean, they're ubiquitous in Africa. According to the World Bank, poverty's been cut by 70% over the last 10 years in Asia because of the ubiquitousness of information technology.
This is something Will Wright said this week at a conference, that computers had turned out to be great intelligence harvesters more than they were intelligence simulators. And ebooks, I've had a remark that was said to me this week, are somewhere between my blog and a print book and a kind of Frankenstein that aren't, I mean, how will they show this in harvesting intelligence capability that we've seen so powerfully manifested on the web?
Well, I mean, once information is in digital form, there's a lot of things you can do with it that are very routine today, and we'll use our imagination how we'll do that tomorrow. Computer intelligence is not yet at human level, so, but it can do a lot of things like search that we couldn't begin to do. So there's advantages right now of both, and once you have information in digital form, we can use both natural and artificial intelligence. I think that's how we'll begin, by putting these computers in our bodies and brains and combining natural and augmented intelligence. There are computers you can put in your brain today if you happen to be a Parkinson's patient. The latest generation actually allows you to download new software to the computer in your brain from outside the patient. That's today. So today it's pea-sized, but 25 years from now, it'll be blood cell size, and you'll be able to send it in without surgery. So it's very hard to anticipate exactly which applications will prevail. So the law of accelerating returns is amazingly predictable on the exponential growth of the basic measures of information technology, like the cost of a MIPS of computing, or the cost of a bit of memory, or the cost of moving a bit around. But what we do with it can be very surprising, like Facebook coming out of a social dating site 5 years ago.
Yeah, but a specific answer to your question about intelligence harvesting, I think Exact Additions was here just the other day talking about some of their analytics. I think the fact that a book knows it's being read is one of the the big changes that I think will be transformative. People will know, oh, people stopped here. I know as an editor, I used to always advise my authors that a lot of what they were trying to do was to anticipate what the reader was going to do. Because if you lose the reader and they go away, they often don't come back. And now we're going to know that. We're going to know. We lost them on page 32. What percentage of people, they have this already on YouTube. It's quite amazing, the analytics that Google has on how far people watch into a video. It's amazing. If you drop down the tab, you can kind of see, okay, and it tells you pretty definitively, don't put up a video longer than 5 minutes, because that's the attention span. In a similar way, we're going to find that certain types of of books work better. We're going to have intelligence that allows us to start shaping them.
And that is actually the most valuable asset that Google has, is all this data. And any organization has these massive databases. It's a tremendous amount of knowledge and intelligence embedded there that can be discovered through analytics.
That's right. And I think this also, as we start moving into this augmented reality world, we're going to start seeing these opportunities for books to be interacting with the real world. These are the conditions under which people use this kind of information. When they're here, they're doing this kind of activity. Because I think we have to understand, when people have, a mobile device, it's really much more an expression of their life, and they're going to encounter books in very many different kinds of circumstances. Yeah. I know we're out of time,
but it's going to integrate. It's not going to be these devices we carry around. We will not have something we put in our palms. I mean,
how long do you think we have before it's actually integrated?
Well, I think it'll take. I mean, there are already displays in your glasses, but they have all kinds of limitations. I mean, just as ebooks had they existed 10 years ago, but the enabling factors weren't there. I think we're 5 or 6 years away from really
That's
ubiquitous
about the time frame
use.
I've used too,
right.
5 or 6 years, yeah. And I think it's going to be mind-blowing, when I said I got laser surgery a few years ago, and I thought, damn, I'm going to have to be wearing glasses again. Because that is going to be one of those interfaces to the world. Well, thank you very much, Ray. I really appreciate your time here, and hopefully you've helped us all to think a little bit further
just
about
one
the future.
last question.
Oh, okay, great, okay. Actually, I didn't realize there was nobody else out here back there. Okay, so do we have time, Gina, to take a couple more questions? Okay.
In page 1 of 100 Years of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez put this character to say, I'm not going to do magic. I'm just going to give life to unanimated objects. Now that we have these kind of books, I would like to imagine, or just to hear your answer, how long until we hear from the novel organization that one writer that makes these kind of books, these kind of new media creations, is going to deserve the Nobel Prize?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the Nobel Prize in general was put in place in the 19th century and doesn't list, for example, computer science on the technical side, and it recognizes certain art forms like literature. And so it has been very traditional in its recognition of literature. How long will it be before they recognize other art forms that span the concept of literature? That's an interesting question. It's kind of a political question.
Yeah, well, it may not be the Nobel Prize, but it does suggest that there is an opportunity for some kind of prize. Maybe we should have the TOC prize. Okay, next question.
Hi, greetings. For Yahweh Shore International Ministries, I have a question. I'm Pedro Rivera, by the way. I represent industries in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. I have a question. If you had this is a hypothetical question. If you had the resources of Microsoft and Apple at your disposal, what would you personally create to advance this medium?
Well, actually, our Blio project is an alliance. Microsoft actually is working closely with us. It's a joint venture between my company and Baker & Taylor, which is a large company that distributes books to 44,000 publishers. So we actually have a lot of resources, and we have lots of plans to augment Blio in the ways we've been talking about, to add these different kinds of content and to provide flexible ways of distributing it. And so our focus right now is to get this out, but it has actually some powerful alliance partners behind it, including leading retailers. And in the long term, I think artificial intelligence is the most interesting, powerful, transformative project we have. We are adding intelligence already. Every product you pick up now has AI at many different levels in its design and its manufacturing and intelligent just-in-time inventory control and in what the product does and its wireless access to intelligent information sources. And so that's going to continue to happen. It happens without us even noticing it the world where every object we touch is intelligent is really just around the corner. So I think AI, which I started working on actually, it's now exactly 50 years ago. I was 12, and I got in touch with Marvin Minsky, who was a 30-year-old professor at MIT, and I'm still working closely with him. And I've been fascinated with recreating the powers of the human mind. I'm working on a book now called How the Mind Works and How to Build One. So if you figure that out, let me know.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think that it's not just the mind, it is also, I think, some of the medical revolutions that you've been following also.
Yeah, that's a whole other field. We're going to expand our longevity. Health and medicine was not an information technology up until just recently. We didn't have the software of life. Now we have the software. That was an exponential progression. The amount of genetic data doubled every year. The cost came down by half every year, and it's continued past the end of the collection of the human genome. We have the means now of updating this software. I mean, how long do you go without updating the software on your cell phone? This is probably updating itself right now as we speak. But we're walking around with software, and it's not a metaphor. It's literally true. That's thousands, in some cases millions of years old. Fat insulin receptor gene says, hold on to every calorie because the next hunting season may not work out so well. That was a good idea 1,000 years ago, but that underlies an epidemic of obesity today. We tried turning that off in animals, and these animals ate ravenously and remained slim and lived 20% longer. And there's thousands of other genes we'd like to either turn off because they advance disease, or add new genes. There's new forms of gene therapy that can do that. We can design these interventions on computers. We can test them out in biological simulators. Health and medicine has just become an information technology. So instead of progressing linearly, as it has been, because it was hit or miss, now it's going to progress exponentially. So it'll be a very different era in, say, 20 years from now as these technologies become mature.
All right. Well, it's going to be an exciting future. Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you very much.